Hello and welcome to Property Money Trees, Maximising Property Values, the once a month show where I break down the steps of how to recognise, enhance and then extract the values in property in order to create wealth. Would you like to find out how you can benefit from the steps of maximising property values? This is even if you don't own a property yet or have a deposit. If that's a yes, then you're in the right place to find out. My name is Patricia Faber, and although many know me for my work as a solicitor, on this show you will be getting the benefit of my 30 plus years worth of experience of maximising property values, experience which has given me a net worth in millions. So who might benefit from listening to this show? Literally anyone with an interest in creating property wealth. Welcome back. Chapter 7, Rent Increases. The way to increase rent is changing, but you can see the current form for this in Appendix 4. Now, if you haven't actually got the book and you can't access this Appendix 4 that I'm referring to, just go to the .gov.uk website and search for Form 4, Increasing Rents, and you should be able to see the form that I am talking about. Things to note. Rent can only be increased at least 12 months after the tenancy starts or after the first tier tribunal, property chamber, decides on the rent or of the parties agreeing to an increment. Rent can only be increased via a statutory procedure and any other means, for example, a set increment provided for in a tenancy agreement, will be unlawful. At least a 2-month notice period to end just before a rent payment period of the landlord's intention to increase the rent must be given to the tenant, who will have the right to challenge this in the tribunal. If challenged, the tribunal may agree that the proposed rent is fair, and if so, it will be payable from the next rent period, or up to 2 months later if the tribunal decides that the tenant needs the extra time within which to pay. Or the tribunal may disagree with the proposed increment but decide that a lower amount is a fair increment, and if so, this will be payable from the next rent period or up to 2 months later if the tribunal decides that the tenant needs the extra time within which to pay. Or the tribunal may decide that no increment is due, in which case things will remain as they are. Or the tribunal may decide that no increment is due but also decide that the current rent is too high and therefore set a figure for a reduced rent. If so, the reduced rent will be payable from the next rent period. If a tenant successfully challenges the increment and the challenge results in the last paid rent amount being reduced and the landlord has received the maximum 5 weeks rent by way of a deposit, security deposit that is, the landlord could automatically be in receipt of a prohibited payment under the Tenant Fees Act 2019. This is because the amount of deposit taken may, at the point of the rent reduction, exceed 5 weeks rent. Now, at the time that the rent would have been collected, it would have been lawful. But now that more than 5 weeks rent might be held by the landlord, the good thinking on this is that the deposit be reduced and the difference paid back to the tenant. Further, care should be taken to also ensure that the rent period prohibited payments under the same Act are monitored, and where they arise are returned to the tenant without delay. The Tenant Fees Act provides that if for a rent period P1 the rent paid is more than that paid in a subsequent rent period P2, that the difference between the two is a prohibited payment. It is worth noting, however, that periods more than 12 months prior are disregarded for these purposes, and so that must be a bit of a relief. The Tenant Fees Act also carries infringement interest and penalties of up to £5,000 for minor infringements and up to £30,000 for more serious ones. and unless prohibited payments are returned to a tenant, the courts won't be able to grant a landlord possession should the landlord be seeking this, unless the landlord is relying on ground 7A and or ground 14. What will be the consequences of getting things wrong? 1. If a tenant is served with a notice to increase their rent, it makes all the sense in the world for them to challenge it because they have very little to lose. So landlords should sensibly gear up for challenges here. 2. There is a risk that the current rent might be decreased and the landlord having to repay the tenant some rent. If so, would asking for an increase be worth contemplating? 3. Even if the landlord wins a challenge, how might this affect a business's viability if it might cost more than the proposed increase to defend the application for an increase? How to mitigate the potential risks? 1. Become familiar with the statutory procedure. See Appendix 4 for the current prescribed form for notifying tenants, where applicable, of a rent increase. 2. Ask yourself if you want to take the risk of asking for an increment if things remain as they are. 3. Gather evidence of local rents before starting the process of increasing rents. Subscription to an automatic valuation software provision might be prudent, and if relevant, make sure that any employed agent is fully informed about the incoming law. 4. Consider taking out insurance if this is an insurable risk. 5. Talk to brokers to see if this might affect mortgage covenants, and if so, find out how and what can be done to ensure mortgage covenant compliance. 6. Monitor possible Tenant Fees Act infringements carefully. So that's that chapter, and next month I will talk about initial rents and tell you what the Renters' Rights Bill is looking to do about those. But in the meantime, stay well.